Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out. This is Joe Jackalone, your host for True Crime with the Sarge. With me tonight, we have a very special guest, retired Chief of Department, Louis Anemone. Chief, thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Joe, for the invite. It's my pleasure
Yeah,
to be here.
I've been looking forward to talking to you since you said yes, because this is about New York City history, about what, I always say, you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And it's kind of like what we're getting ready to do. So we like to lay out to the audience exactly what was going wrong in the 80s, 90s, what got fixed, and then how we ended up into this mess that we're doing right now. So you had what, 4 decades in the New York City Police Department. You started in the 1960s, right, as a trainee.
Yeah, police trainee, 1964. I
Wow.
retired in July of 1999.
All right. So you have what? So
30,
34,
yeah,
35 years.
34 and a half.
Yep, it's close enough, right? 35 for us non-mathematicians. 35 years is close enough for me.
It's good enough for civil service, Joe.
So I mean, the audience doesn't understand, right? So the chief we have right here, everything that happened in regards to the 90s about changing the turnaround, he's one of the main architects and implementers of many of the different things. So things tonight, we're going to talk about ComStat, disorder control, how they dealt with riots, and all those other things. The chief here was responsible for helping putting this together and then implementing, which is the hardest part, because anybody can be the idea guy, right? We need that person to get his hands dirty, and that was you. So let's take everybody back to the Crown Heights riots. It was right before I got on the police department. I got on the police department in 1992, actually during the Washington Heights riots, which happened the year afterwards. I think it was 92, right? So when you were in Crown Heights, you were still working up in the Bronx at the time?
Yes, I was the 9th Division commander. I was an inspector.
And then, so were you called down to Crown Heights right away, or was this one of those?
Not right away. You had 3 days of nonstop violence and craziness. You had people being assaulted. You had a homicide. Yankel Rosenbaum was stabbed to death during those 3 days, and it looked like the mayor was not, and it was David Dinkins at the time, was not interested in having a forceful police response to what was going on there. That is until he himself and the police commissioner, Lee Brown, were bombarded with airmail, bottles, bricks, rocks, as they left a public school where they were meeting the community, supposedly. Later that same night, that third night, there were 5 or 6 cops from the 4-8 who were shot with a shotgun, after dark out there while they're working their post. The following day, I got a forthwith to Brooklyn South, along with John Timoney, Mike Julian, Tom Lawless. We were all inspectors at the time. And Ray Kelly met us there, and Chief Mario Salvati. They said, the mayor wants this to end. Louis, you're going to be at the epicenter. You're going to be at Union and President, or Utica and President. You'll have 250 cops, 5 captains, et cetera, and the requisite number of lieutenants and sergeants. Do what you can. And we did. That very first night, Joe, and people should understand this, I spoke to each group as they formed. And we were there in the afternoon, about 1 or 2 o'clock. We worked right through till 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. But for every group that was starting to form, I walked over, I says, hi, I introduced myself. These are the rules. And they hadn't had that for 3 days. You're going to listen to our, instructions, follow my instructions, and we're all going to have a nice, peaceful night. If you don't, I'm not here to allow you to, to assault anyone, to break any windows, to set fires, or to disrupt traffic, whether it's pedestrian or vehicular. Stay on the sidewalk, and we'll take you wherever you have to go. And when they didn't, they were arrested. And we made, I don't know, so there were hundreds of these people demonstrating, and really they were rioting. They had no intention of really doing a demonstration. It was clear, after the first and second groups started to walk off. But, my instructions to the captains, to the lieutenants, to the sergeants were clear. If they leave the sidewalk, if they enter the streets, if they disrupt traffic, if they disrupt people on, coming out of stores, stopped them, identified them, and placed them under arrest. We made, I don't know, 30 or 40 arrests. That was the last night of the Crown Heights riots. Now, it sounds easy. But some of these, they got a little smarter as the night wore on. They stay on the sidewalk and they bring us across Eastern Parkway to the 7-7 side, where they had people up on the rooftops throwing bricks down, on the cops. So you had to have people designated, to hit the rooftops, clear the rooftops, empty that stuff down in the backyard, do a whole block at a time. But by the end of the night, that was it. We were there for another week, drinking hydrant water at Utica and President, in the hot August sun until, late at night. But there was no more riot. It took leadership. And, Ray Kelly gave it, Mario Salvaggi gave it, and certainly each of the inspectors gave it. Mike Julian was charged with protecting 770 Eastern Parkway, and he had 250 cops, and he protected it. And when they tried to break through his lines, they were collared.
It always amazed me. It always amazed me when the police department actually wanted to get something done. They wanted something fixed. They always know who to call in, right? They know exactly. It's like, all right, we're not calling that guy, or let's get this group in, right? You were part of that.
So I had a little bit of an in. Now that I think of it, I was the only guy from Manhattan North that was out there doing this. But Salvaggi was the chief of patrol at the time, and he had been the exec in the borough and the CO of Manhattan North Borough while I was a precinct commander. So he knew me. He knew what I was capable of doing.
And your reputation, even from the Bronx, when you were up there for a long time. I mean, listen, the Bronx in the 80s and 90s was not a picnic. Tough place. I mean, that's where I cut my teeth up there too. When I got out of the academy, they sent us up there. And I was a cop, we started out in the Bronx. But we were actually in the academy when the Washington Heights riots broke out, right? With Kiko Garcia. Yeah, Kiko Garcia. Kiko gets shot and killed by the police during the thing. And I think it started off as a rumor, right? Somebody lied and said that they executed the guy.
Yeah, but it wasn't a mistaken rumor. It was a deliberate plant by the drug dealers. They let that word out, and then they spread it, and they had people on the payroll to start it up, and then it was just a matter of everyone, jumping on.
Yeah, people in the chat are saying, "Yuck, we couldn't have done better than hydrant water." Now everybody gets their own personal bottle of water in the academy. Nothing but Avion for the new recruits.
This was the days when we had iron men and wooden ships, guys.
Right now everyone's got their own personal water in Starbucks cups.
Yeah.
And things have changed greatly. So Washington Heights though lasted a couple of days too, right?
Yeah, it did.
I mean,
it did. Now, so as far as that, I was in at that point, I was in SOD. That was my reward for Crown Heights performance. I was the XO of SOD, and I was restricted from responding by name. I was not allowed to respond.
Right.
But I managed, after dark, after my boss left for the day, took a ride with a couple of guys in the car, and we went up to the Heights. We made a gun collar in the Heights during all this. But and again, the mayor at the time, again, it's still Dinkins. He ends up paying for the funeral, for flying Kiko's body back to the DR, paying all the expenses, and
bad message.
We all knew the truth, but it took them in the media and at City Hall months to figure out that he was a bad guy. He lied, and everyone lied about what happened that night except the police.
Yep. And I think the two women came forward, right, and said they lied. They came forward afterwards, but after that was like months later.
The damage was done.
The damage was already done.
Reputations to the community. It was unnecessary. It didn't have to happen like that.
And this is when so after Washington Heights, so when you're in Special Operations Division and things started to change now, you're tasked with putting together the task force, right? Can you explain to the audience what that was all about?
So in 1993 now, the state was just about ready to release an investigative report on the Crown Heights riots from 1991. Ray Kelly asked me to head up a small team to take a look at the disorder control mobilization plans, the training, the equipment, the policies, practices, uh, for anything to do with disorder control, with a view towards heading off this state investigation and showing them that we were seriously intent on changing and getting better at this. So with Tommy Graham, Nick Casal, Gene Mullahy, Vic Galante, Jerry Velez, we started the process, and we worked that entire year, January through December. We published the disorder control guidelines in December, but we had mock mobilization drills every couple of weeks, different spots in the city. We had tabletop exercises, command post exercises, tracks exercises, which were pencil and paper. And then we were at the academy revamping their training for recruits as well. So that the first time an officer was asked to form a wedge or a line or make an arrest team, make way for the arrest, that they would, the first time they heard it wouldn't be during a riot, that they would have been familiar with the practices. And we thought we did a pretty good job. But, to get everybody in the department, we had to do midnights as well to get the first platoon trained in their duties and responsibilities as well. And we did that throughout the city for 12 months that year, and then it continued. In 94, I became chief of patrol in January, and I took that group under the chief of patrol's office. And, they continued, Tommy Graham in particular, continued all of that and more. He really enhanced everything we were doing up to that point.
And that was basically the beginning of the task forces in each borough too, right?
Well, we had task forces, but now they became, Joe, the tip of the spear for these situations that could very quickly and very easily degenerate into a riot, whether it would be a Crown Heights riot or something, God forbid, on the scale of the LA riots. We studied all of those other cities that had issues, what their critique said, what the investigating commission said, and we tried to avoid all that. But really revamping, giving the task force people some pride in what they were doing, the equipment they needed. And we told them, point blank, they were the ones that were going to be first in the mix during a riot, during a disorder control situation. We wanted them to be prepared, trained, and not afraid to do the right thing, that we were behind them and we would be backing them. And
I remember.
They were terrific. And we expanded the headcounts in those. Now that I was chief of patrol, we beefed them up in every borough in the city, including a little bit of a late tour presence too. So we had three shifts.
I remember right before we got out of the academy, they sent us back to the gym, and we were doing the wedges and the shields and the batons and everything else. Some of these things have been taken away from the cops now today, right? I mean, you can't even wear your riot helmet because they say it invokes people to want to fight you. I'm like,
it triggers,
it's meant not to get hit in the head. Yeah,
it triggers hostility from ordinary people who are God-fearing and human-loving, but the mere sight of a police officer wearing a defensive helmet on his head or her head is enough to trigger a response. And we have politicians that buy that, they're selling the wolf tickets, the ACLU and the New York Liberties groups. They're selling the wolf tickets, but the politicians in the city are buying it, hook, line, and sinker. And it's disgraceful. They're taking away the, defensive equipment that your cops shouldn't be without.
Yeah, I mean, I see when they were having the riots or the disturbances, even all over the country, you see the cops wearing soft hats and getting rocks and bottles and stuff and bricks thrown at them. It's kind of like, geez.
It's a recipe for disaster and for injuries. You need protection, and helmets are not an offensive weapon. There's no reason to deny an officer the right to wear his or her helmet when they're in a situation where they deem their safety is at risk.
And it's unfortunate because when I got on in the police department in 1992, by the time I got out in 2012, we kind of got away from a lot of these things that you implemented going back in the
Yeah,
90s about how to do this stuff. And it was almost like you say to yourself, we're setting ourselves up. Yeah, everything's calm, everything's good, right? Crime's gone down so much. We haven't had any civil disturbances, but you're asking for trouble.
yeah, you really are. The secret to all this stuff, not that I or Tommy Graham were geniuses. It's just that you have to have that stick-to-itiveness. You've got to be at it every day, and you have to recognize that as people retire and people get promoted and move to different positions, this training regimen has to be has to be institutionalized, so that these no-notice mobilization drills, the red letter drills that we developed, should have been, continued long after 99, long after I retired, right through the 2000s. And you'd have a generation of cops now who understood and knew what to do. And I'm including the bosses in that because they're
Right.
key, the captains and above, the lieutenants, the sergeants. You don't want to put them in a position where the first time they're asked to perform disorder control duty or to know what the tactics and the strategies are is during an event, because nobody's been training,
No,
talking about it for years.
I could tell you the last 5 or 6 years before I retired, I hadn't gone to one
Yeah,
disorder control training at one. And as a supervisor, I mean, listen, I remembered what I had to do, but I'm dealing with a whole generation of cops. If I told them to make a wedge, they would go and make me a sandwich, right?
yeah,
That's basically give me a wedge and they get you a sandwich. I
yeah.
mean,
It's crazy.
it's troubling.
But I did notice that there were quite a few police executives who learned how to kneel during
Oh
these
God, yeah,
disputes. And
yeah.
again, stomach turning, ridiculous, just so stupid, so very stupid.
So 1993, you're chief of patrol, right? So now we have a whole new
94 chief of
94.
patrol.
And we have a whole new administration that's coming, right? We have
Right.
Rudy Giuliani as the mayor. We have Bill Bratton as the police commissioner. And that's when things really had to change. Because I remember when I first got on, the captain would come in, he'd have 2 or 3 VHS tapes under his arm, close the door, and you didn't see him the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And it was like New Year's Eve night, people taking bets on what's precinct was going to get the first homicide. And
Yeah.
people think like I'm kidding. I'm like, no, this is what the attitude was about crime
Yeah.
before we had this whole new administration, a new idea.
Yeah.
So we bring in, so Bratton comes in and makes you chief of department.
Well, chief of patrol in
Chief of
94,
patrol.
right, from Bratton. And then Giuliani really made me the chief of department in January 95. I was 1 year chief of patrol.
Right. And then you jump.
Bratton told me I was the best promotion he never made when I became chief of department. They had Bratton and Timoney had I think recommended somebody else for the position, and the mayor said no. He said I want Anemone. Now I didn't know him before. He just knew me from my work ethic during that 1994 year. We had a couple of near misses up in the Heights, and he liked the work that we did up there.
Right. And here's a little bit of what if kind of scenario, right? So if things could have been entirely different. So Bratton brings in this whole team. So we have Jack Maple, we have
there's a genius. There was a genius, smartest guy I ever met, Joe.
I never met him in person. I always regretted that. But I was still a young cop back then, and we weren't up in that echelon. We try to avoid One Police Plaza at all costs.
It worked for me over the years.
So people who are on the job totally understand what I'm saying, but the people who don't, it's like, why would you want to avoid headquarters? There's a good reason why you want to avoid headquarters. So it was never good, right? So you either in trouble or something else happened that you had to get called down there. But so Jack Maple comes up with this whole ComStat idea,
right?
But they still need somebody to put it into play, and that was your role, correct?
So he walks in the office one day early in 94, it might have been February or March. He says, Louis, we got to do something. Would you help me with this? I said, sure, Jack. What are you talking about? He said, I want to, create a new way of us counting the crimes, getting notified sooner, whatever it takes. He says, I don't have any staff. I said, all right. I gave him Billy Gorda, John Yo, and Gene White from my office. And, with those three and him, they created the template for ComStat. And I don't know if you remember, but initially these precinct commanders came to headquarters with an easel, a map of the precinct, and acetate overlays. One would show homicides, one might show robberies, one might show drugs. And during the meeting, we'd ask them to flip and add the next layer, and we get a good picture of the crime in each of those precincts. The way we met twice a week, every week, Wednesdays and Fridays at 7 in the morning. Jack's idea was, let's meet at 7. We'll run it till 10:15, before the business of the city starts, really. So we had these precinct commanders, squad commanders, etc., down there at headquarters at 7 o'clock in the morning. And it was a conversation and problem-solving exercise. You, as a precinct commander, Joe, should know, and your squad commander should know what's going on in your area of responsibility. I'm in headquarters, and Jack is in headquarters, Maple. And for us to ask questions that nobody at the podium had an answer to indicates to me that either they're not trying, or it's that captain with the 3 DVDs under his arm as he goes into his office, at risk at that point. Homicides in 92 or something, it's not sustainable.
And countless robberies. I mean, you wouldn't even know how many robberies you had. There were so many of them. And then, just in every other of the 7 major felonies that they tracked. So, this was all about accountability, right? Holding the captains or inspectors, wherever they were at Sergeant, accountable for the crime. And if they didn't have an answer, boy, they were in trouble.
And that's as simple as it was. People would say, oh, you're too harsh, people losing their commands. Not necessarily. People were promoted also as a result of their work in the precincts or in squads. And they showed us, what they were doing and how they were doing it. And you could get a feel for me being in headquarters, I can get a feel for the 77 commanders, 77 squad commanders, a couple of dozen narcotic commanders. I got to know these people somewhat just through the interactions at the meetings. In the course of a month, we would see every borough in the city, and every precinct would be there at least once a month. So then in the course of a year, you had the whole city, a number of times. And you get to see their, and the sin at ComStat wasn't that, your crime was up. It was that you didn't have a plan, or you didn't give a shit about the crime. You didn't care for the people in the community, or the business people who worked there, or people who were living there trying to get their kids educated. And that came across sometimes very clearly from some people. It wasn't, flip the switch, Giuliani's here, we're going to create a sense of urgency, everybody on board. Not everybody wanted to do it. They wanted to do it the old way. Wait till the newspaper calls with a high profile case. We'll solve those. Oh no, we want you to solve every case.
Yep. No, I remember when, hearing stories, whatever. And I remember when I had to go to ComStat, from the detectives bureau kind of thing. And I don't remember who it was, but they said, well, we don't, this is not the way we used to do it. And the captain turned to it and says, well, we used to wear diapers. You don't do that anymore either. So, it's kind of, this is it. Yeah. It was I think it was Tuesday, the call would come down, right?
Yeah.
And the place was like, the place was like on edge because nobody knew the phone call, who was going next. And you could hear the sigh of relief when they're like, oh, great, Brooklyn North is going. Yeah. We don't have to worry about it this week. Back to normal. Yeah. It was people, it struck fear. It's like the old saying, right? Kill one, scare 10,000. That's basically what, because you had to do it. And then all of a sudden things started turning around. I mean, listen, I always tell people loved being cops back then. And even though you were being worked, I mean, morale was through the roof. Yeah. And if you remember, Joe, we had years of 0 raises. Remember the signs? 0 for heroes. 0, 0, 0, 3, 3, and 6. I'll never forget it. Yeah.
Zeros for heroes. And we still managed to get guys and gals to do their job and take pride in the job that they were doing.
Seriously lacking today.
Yeah. Well,
pride is about people don't realize it.
I don't blame the cops. I don't. I look higher up the chain there for and over at City Hall too. The last couple of administrations, tough, very very tough on law enforcement.
We're going to get into that in a little bit for sure.
Yeah.
So when ComStat, so then it's just doesn't the police precincts, right? So the detective bureau squads and the narcotics, right? So when these overlays, right, you would just basically point out where the clusters were happening, right? And what was your response, kind of thing, right? That's
what's the plan? Was the favorite, captain, inspector? Do you have a plan to address what's going on there? And after a while, we found out that they really did know what was happening. They presented fairly well, the issues involved. And now the next step was, well, now you have to create a plan. And it shouldn't only be you. You have to have your detective commander involved in that plan. And if there's a housing project nearby, you got to have them involved. And if, someone's fleeing into the trains, you got to have transit involved. And if it's a narcotics set, well, you got to get them. And if you still need additional help, you might want the street crime unit, at nighttime. But we wanted to see them doing that, work collaboratively, cooperatively, create a written plan, no verbal, BS, had to be a written plan. And that's all. That's all I wanted. Okay, so who's going to be working it on Friday night? Who's going to be working it Saturday morning? Who's going to be working it Sunday night? And again, that was one of the low-hanging fruit. Everybody wanted to work 10 to 6 and, Monday to Friday. So that had to change.
Yeah, no crime on the weekends or holidays.
Yeah, no. Nothing happens on the weekend, right?
Nothing happens on the weekend. But one thing I did learn, right? So from being patrol and being a sergeant and everything, 2 words that we always learn: displacement and diffusion.
Yeah.
So the displacement became a big problem because some precinct commanders were just pushing it into the next guys or girls precinct.
That's the lazy guys, solution. So we had a couple of precincts where we weren't sure if that was happening or not. So when we would bring down Brooklyn North, for example, the 8-3 shared a border with the, I think it was the 104.
Yep.
102, one of those Queens precincts. So we had that precinct commander show up too. So now they were both at the podium together, and we put up the maps and we'd see, along the border, what's going on across the border. Are these the same perps, in the Queens side that are hitting? And why don't you work out a cooperative plan together? And that wasn't the only place that had that issue, though. It'll come to be later. But there were other precincts that shared borders with precincts in other boroughs or in other divisions that ended up having to show up together at ComStat.
Yeah. Well, we even had, when I was up in the Bronx, we boarded Mount Vernon.
Yeah.
And, when all this started, all of a sudden there was a radio for the Mount Vernon Police Department at the desk.
Yeah.
Right. So not only did you have the police precincts working within the city with other agencies, but now we're actually reaching out to other jurisdictions and trying to come up with a plan together.
Yeah, that's great. How many times over the years chases from the north would come down south into the Bronx, or the other way around? We'd be chasing somebody north, up to Mount Vernon or Yonkers or something.
Yonkers, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, between the 5-0 and Yonkers, the 4-7 and Mount Vernon, and those places. Mount Vernon was a tough area back then.
Yeah, it was. Hey, the whole city was a tough area back then.
Yeah, I try to explain to people when they say, "Oh, what I don't know." I'm sure this phrase gets you nuts too when people say, "Oh, it's not as bad as it was in the 1990s."
So that's one argument. But here's one that we can shoot that down, right? I think, or make the case. Well, you may be right in some aspects of that, but if left to continue the way things are now, with the bail laws and with the discovery laws, et cetera, raise the age of, all of that, parole, when you roll all that in, the city could be very quickly looking at the same type of issues that we were looking at in 93 and 94. So you don't want it to get that bad. The other issue I have is that, the city is constantly turning over, Joe. Young people come here from all over and this is nice. This is beautiful. They don't realize what it was, what it took to get to this position. And you certainly don't want to go back to that. So there's a certain naivete out there. They think everything is fine and wonderful, and it's always going to be that. No, it's not.
Yeah.
Not unless, you have support for the police, for law and order, for the prosecutors that have to be, have to start doing their jobs.
Yeah.
This is, it's a recipe for disaster.
Well,
Right.
one of the things that when I teach at school, one of the subjects is Tompkins Square Park.
Right.
And you look at some of the parallels that we see today with the parks, the same things are happening.
Yeah.
And, I did an interview with the New York Post, and they said, what does this remind you of? Well, Tompkins Square Park is a powder keg waiting to go. And sure enough, we're starting to see the same kind of thing. For those that don't know, there was basically a 24-hour 1013 down there. It was craziness.
Tough place.
Yeah.
Tough place to work. In fact, when they had the parade welcoming home the troops from the first
Gulf War.
war in Iraq, the Gulf War, I was assigned 12-hour shifts from like 4 o'clock to 4 in the morning at Tompkins Square Park, because they were holding demonstrations against the war, against the government. And they booby-trapped, the streets. They booby-trapped the police cars. It was a constant battle for, about 4 or 5 days down there. Nights, actually, right through the night. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that there's, thankfully for the internet today, some of these videos still exist. So the kids can see what the Bronx looked like in 1988, just burnt out buildings. And when they watch the videos, they're like, what do you mean? That's what, Manhattan looked like, Harlem, and, blocks are just shells of houses. And they're like, and you look at it today, they're like, oh, I live on 135th Street. My house cost $900,000. I'm like, they were giving those houses away 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Giving those buildings away.
Yeah, it's so true. So very true.
Now, I would say
the city didn't always look like it does now. 42nd Street didn't always look like it did now.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't. I always looked at it too. I said, as cops, we saw the change happen. We should have been investing in buying real estate back in the day.
You don't know how many times I've had that conversation with different guys over the years. I was up in the 3-2 as a sergeant. So you'd have a cup of coffee maybe on a midnight. If you got a break, you'd sit and, maybe the driver would say, Sarge, the subway stop here, you get on the subway, the first stop is 125th, and then the second stop is 59th Street, Columbus Circle. He said, that's a pretty good commute, isn't it? And you'd say, well, yeah, but who wants to be a pioneer up here? These are tough years, tough times, violent times. But people did it. People bought the property. People moved. People lived up there. And those houses are selling for a lot of money.
Oh, my God. I say I kick myself every time I see these brownstones going for $2 million, $3 million. And you try to wake. So but, one of the...
Go ahead.
No. So, yeah. So you were into all this development and implementing things. And I know there's one thing that you don't really get a chance to talk about, or I've seen a couple of your interviews, but I want to talk about. You did TrafficStat too, correct?
Correct.
How would we work it out today with with the bicycle lanes and the people and stuff like that? So tell the audience what TrafficStat was about.
Right. So TrafficStat was a direct development from the ComStat. ComStat was a conversation about crime, right? And trying to prevent crime. TrafficStat was a conversation about traffic accidents, collisions, injuries, and deaths, and trying to reduce the numbers across the board there. So while the precinct CO had to come down to a ComStat meeting, 7 in the morning, we had the precinct executive officers attend the TrafficStat. So it gave them an opportunity to show what they were made of and how much work they were willing to do to assist in reducing fatalities and injuries from traffic accidents. And it also prepared them for when they would become precinct commanders and have to attend a ComStat. We used the same room, the same setup, the same maps. But now we talked about the 3 E's, really, of traffic: enforcement, education, and engineering. And most of the textbooks will tell you the solution to improving fatalities and accidents, reducing all of that, lies in either one of those areas, those 3 E's, or all 3. And we talk to them about, hey, what are we doing on the engineering? And some of these captains would show up with their highway safety officer who had a schematic drawn of the intersections in question in their precinct. It might be Queens Boulevard. It might have been the Concourse if it was a Bronx precinct. And, they're showing us why it's a problem the way it's set up, or why the timing of the traffic light is, not helpful. And we'd have at this meeting, at this TrafficStat meeting, representatives from the Department of Transportation for that particular borough. So that person was able to say, okay, we'll take a look at it. We'll sit and we'll meet with that precinct. We'll see if we can come up with a suggestion, with a fix. And in many cases, that's what they did. They took the cops' idea, they ran with it, they fixed it, and we saved a life. We saved hundreds of injuries. We saved lives, and we reduced a lot of the injuries and accidents during those years. The other thing that's always an issue with TrafficStat was driving while intoxicated. And we wanted to know, so what are you doing in the precinct about that? In the way of education, in the way of engineering, if there is any kind of an engineering solution, or in the way of enforcement. And some precinct commanders had very ingenious solutions. Others, figured out different ways of doing it. But they were all working hard on it. And, it was needed. It was something that was needed. Certainly today, with the bike lanes that they have and the double parking and triple parking, it's nigh near impossible, I would think, to without just completely gutting the current situation.
Well, yeah, that's why I brought it up.
This $23 a day congestion fee is going to help, I think.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, it's going to prevent trucks from coming in, and then you're not going to have anything to eat or drink or anything. And then, do you think they're going to reduce their fees? They're going to increase their fees for the fees that they got to pay, and things again.
Of course.
That's a whole other story. But so we've gotten away. The city got away from TrafficStat a long time ago. They've totally dropped it. And then, of course, the enforcement has gone by the wayside too. And there's even city council members that are trying to or they've already proposed bills to get the NYPD out of traffic enforcement altogether.
There's a solution. That's nice and easy. There you go. So there'll be no more car stops, right? Good.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I scratch my head, and then they complain that bicycle people on bikes are getting hit and killed. But we want to take away enforcement because of whatever. It's, to me, you scratch your head and just say to yourself, what happened to the thinkers, right? What happened to the doers that we used to have in the 90s? Yeah. And it's just gotten totally out of control.
So it sounds like at times that the inmates are actually running the asylum.
That's a phrase unfortunately I use way too often.
Yeah.
When you come talking about this. And then so you did TrafficStat, you implemented the ComStat, and then there was something else that you did was super important that a lot of people don't give you credit for or don't focus on, and that's that you were ahead of the Firearms Discharge Board.
Ah, yes. Yeah.
Right. And
chairman of the Firearms Discharge Review Board.
And this is a part of New York City history that really gets zero credit for a lot of things, right? So the last few years we saw there was a huge focus on officer-involved shootings,
right? And
the demand that the NYPD reform. And I'm trying to explain to people that I got the stats in front of me here. In 1972, the NYPD shot and killed 994 people.
There you go.
In 2020, it was 43.
Yeah.
Right. So when you were actually on the board, you helped reduce officer-involved shootings in the New York City Police Department by 60%. I was doing the numbers.
Yeah.
So in 1995, we had 345 incidents. And in 1999, I gave you the whole year because I don't remember exactly when you left, there was 155.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. What was the plan behind that?
So the plan was, walking into the office in January of 1995, there was a backlog of 250 firearms cases that hadn't been heard by the Chief of Department's Firearms Discharge Review Board. So, there's a message then that's going out to the field. Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Nothing's going to happen. And, Joe, you and I know, but I'd like the public who aren't members of the police department to know too, that, the sanctity of life, the preservation of human life is our number one, mission. And whether or not the police officer was justified, we took a good, hard look at each and every one of these cases to make sure that we weren't missing something, to make sure that if there was a training issue, that the cops would get it, but not that they would have to wait a year or 2 or 3 years for the case to be heard. We expedited our review. We were meeting 2 and 3 times a week, along with ComStat and TrafficStat, convening the Firearms Discharge Review Board to go over these cases, clear up the backlog, and then get right on the current cases, as well as sending out a tactics message once a month or so. You pick up different things. Maybe cops were getting sloppy in car stops or handling domestic disputes. You didn't want to see people hurt unnecessarily, whether it was a cop or a civilian. Take a good hard look at it. And then you have to have the moral courage to, on occasion, Joe, we had to separate people from the department because of their improper use of the firearm. And, word like that gets around, as well as the training, the constant harping on it, and the fact that people say, hey, wow, I had a shooting last week and they're calling me down, for my hearing, a week later or 2 weeks later. That gets everyone's attention. This is something the chief and his team are looking at. Let's make sure we stay on top of this as well. Plus, we switched over to the 9mm during that time frame also.
Yeah.
And that was, there's a learning curve with the new firearm. Let me ask you, when you came out of the academy, you used the 38 Special?
Yep.
Yeah.
We were the last academy class with the 38.
Right. So then you had to transition to the new one. Right. Yeah. The way, the rest of us did who were already there. Yeah. So it wasn't easy. It was, tough work, but that's what they were paying us the big bucks for.
Right. But when you think about it, the NYPD reduces shootings while transitioning from basically 6 rounds to 16. And they still were able to reduce shootings. So when people ask all the time about, how do we reduce police shootings? I say we don't have to look much further than what we were doing, right? It was about firearms training. It was about cover and concealment. I remember all these things ingrained in your head.
Speed, and surprise.
And about the fun house and the training and the cap guns, whatever we were using back then, and also then it also had to do with modifications to the guns too.
Yeah, all of that was ongoing, and a lot of that came out of the Firearms Review Board. I convened a couple of different working groups. We had a spate of a really bad run of dog shootings. Now we got a group together, take a look at the dog shootings. What's going on here? Is there something else we can do? Accidentals. There were a slew of accidentals where unfamiliarity with the 9mm and the adrenaline, and maybe they're running, a cop is running and accidentally lets a round go. So that was all part and parcel of it. And we'd ask the firearms unit, if they were the proper agency or unit, to take a look at it, develop better training to address any and all of these different issues with the firearm. But they knew, out in the field, this was an issue that the department was concerned with. Crime prevention, accident prevention, the use of deadly force, civilian complaints, try to, cover the spectrum.
Yeah, no, and that's really what it's all about, right? So the
Yeah.
training, the accountability. I mean, the street cops were now accountable. They were giving you this 9 millimeter because we're trying to even out the firepower out on the street, and you gotta be careful with it because they're gonna take it away from us. And I think that was the mentality for a
Yeah.
lot of cops back then.
Certainly, the other issue, we with the reduction in the shootings, let's not forget that we merged the transit and the housing police, so that we picked up another 6,500 officers, and we still were able to reduce the number of shootings. So it's a tribute to the leadership out in the field, to the commanders, whether it was in the squads or in the precincts or the transit districts, the housing PSAs, narcotics. Everybody was working the problem.
Right. So yeah, we have the question from Liz says, so why wasn't this knowledge translated to the current police department? There's a lot of issues with it. I knew you were going to chuckle when I said that. A lot of issues. We're going to get into those issues in the last few minutes of this. I just want to get to one other question. I just want to kind of revert back to ComStat. Hey, do you think after 30 years the ComStat model has run its course, or do you think that we need something new, or it needs to be refined?
Well, it depends if there's a need for a sense of urgency, Joe. If the people in the city and the mayor, listening to the people, and the police commissioner listening to the mayor, think that there should be a sense of urgency about crime prevention, violence prevention, then there's no better way to do it than with a ComStat. The other piece of that is, if you're going to have or create this sense of urgency, I don't think you do it with a meeting once a week. So that alone sends a message to people out in the field that, well, this may be important, but it's not that important. They're only meeting once a week for ComStat. The other thing is, it's if it's going to be done right, it takes a specific type of person with good leadership skills, person who can withstand, and there's a lot of hard work involved. Now, I realize the numbers are down today, so it may not be as overwhelming as I felt that it was, when Jack and I were doing it, or when I was doing it with Eddie Norris after Jack left the department. There was a lot of violence, a lot of crime, but you had to stay on it, and we had to do it, twice a week, every week. The precinct commander was there once a month. So it's if you have those leaders in the police department, this is what they should be, talking up now, picking
Yeah,
out.
because I look at, like, for instance, so the Staten Island, the borough of Staten Island,
Yeah,
or we used to call the Richmond County Police Department.
yeah,
They have a real big problem with crime this year. I think the
yeah,
homicides are up 1,000%. I think I saw, I had to take off my glasses to make sure I read it correct. I think it was
yeah,
19-2 or something like that.
yeah,
Something crazy. Now, this is, to me, would be like, well, where's ComStat on this, right?
yeah.
I mean, this just didn't just start. This has been going on since last year at Staten Island.
Right.
So, and there's been, as far as I'm concerned, very little interest in saying,
Yeah.
hey, what's going on in Staten Island? What would you have done at this point?
Oh no! Long before we got to 19 homicides, we would be having these discussions with those precinct commanders, borough commanders, squad commanders at the meeting. What's your plan? What's going on? What's driving the violence? What are you doing about it? And I'm sure today, the answer. And I was hard. I wasn't accepting excuses, Joe, back then. If you're going to create this sense of urgency, you can't accept, just, hey, it's hard work, chief. I only got 6 guys. I need 8. Never mind. Work those 6. Work them like dogs if you have to, but get the closure. Catch the bad guys, and do it sooner rather than later.
Right.
Next time we see you here, we want to see a success story. But again, the sin isn't that the numbers are up. The sin is that, is there a plan? Is anyone asking about a plan? Is anyone creating a plan, and a viable plan to address it? And when I had ComStat meetings, I had a representative from the DA's office sitting behind me. So if issues came up about prosecution, I turn around and ask him, Mr. DA, what's the story? Why are we, what do we have to do? Okay, I'll talk to the squad commander, on the break. Good, thank you. Work something out. I don't want to hear this same story every month. The DA is 343ing. That's letting gun cases go without even arraigning them. Why? It turned out it was a training issue. They didn't like the way the cops were telling the story to the complaint room DA. All right, tell them what they're supposed to be saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would probably get nauseous about what's happening with the DA's offices today, and who's not even prosecuting. Yeah, you would lose your mind. I think.
Crazy. So that's another tough thing, to try and lock people up and have them back out on the street. Eventually it's going to create a crime wave.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing it. And for the average person that looks at the crime stats and say, all right, well, we're kind of even. We're near 0% for the year, so everything's going okay. But what they don't realize is that we had the largest rise in violence ever in New York City history, of a 35% increase in homicides over 2 years, that we're still not even broke even yet.
Right.
We're basically, this is the new normal. So all those old numbers that we got, they're here to stay.
Yeah, so that's the plateau, and the next move is going to be up, I would predict, not down from that plateau.
Right. Yeah, and that's why people like myself and yourself are like, we're kind of ringing the alarm, going, guys, we flatlined. This is not a victory lap.
Yeah, exactly. Things have got to be done, and sooner again rather than later.
So for the last few minutes that I have with you, over the last 2 years, we've seen record numbers of retirements and resignations, right? Resignations even being the worst part of it than the retirements. We know about retirements are going to come. How do you think this affects the New York City Police Department and quite frankly, law enforcement all throughout the country suffering the same kind of problem?
Yeah. So across the country, again, you've correctly identified this as an issue. So the retirements, you say, they are a normal course of. I just think, and I get the sense that there are more of them. Back in the day, I think guys would hang around a little longer. They do 22, 23, maybe 25 years. You're not seeing that now. And with that loss, you're losing knowledge. You're losing corporate knowledge, how things work, what worked in the old days. Here's something I can teach you on a car stop. Here's a way to handle a domestic dispute. Here's where you should station yourself. Here's how to search somebody out on the street. That's the kind of information and knowledge that's invaluable that the older cops have, and they're leaving, they're retiring, and there's a young generation that's not replacing. They're not being replaced one for one, Joe. No. Yeah. So if you're losing 1,200, you're hiring 300 or 400. There's a net loss there that's huge when you start seeing it, once a month, every single month. Then you have the resignations, and generally those are your better cops. I always remembered a fire scene we were at. We were called to the fire scene. I was a sergeant or a captain or something. I responded. I'm talking to the battalion chief, and I said, what's going on? What do you need? Well, I need some. The crowd is getting a little frisky here. They're not staying back. I need some cops. And I look around. I says, cops. I said, some of the best cops we had are riding on the back of your rigs for them to work. And I recognized two of these guys are cops from the 3-2 riding on the back of a rig. So, we've always had that loss, but those are generally really good people who can pick and choose their place of employment. They're sought after, whether it's by Westchester, Rockland, Nassau, Suffolk, New Jersey communities now, other agencies in other states. They are recruiting here, and they're taking, the cream of the crop. And then there's talk about lowering standards, and maybe a college degree isn't necessary anymore. Where are we going with this? What's the game plan?
It's not. It actually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy for all the cop haters out there who saying, when they hire people that they shouldn't hire, and then they do stupid things, they get themselves arrested, and they turn around and go, "See, look how bad the cops are." But this is the environment that they help create. The whole defund the police movement and the constant bashing of the police over the last couple of years has led to, even I have students come to me at school and saying, do I continue looking for this job
Yeah.
now, or should I do something else?
Yes.
And it's a shame, because these kids really wanted to do policing, and they wanted to serve their communities, and now many of them are saying, listen, I'm taking the Nassau test. So, and that's the other thing, Nassau and Suffolk have been given tests a lot more frequently now, I
Yes.
think, knowing
Yeah.
that they can poach out of New York City for sure.
Yeah. Listen, if you're a taxpayer in any of those places, you hire an NYPD cop, the turnaround time is like days. It's not 6 months, 3 months, because they've gone through all the required training already. All they need to learn is, the department rules and procedures, and maybe some local administrative laws. That's it. Put them out on the street right away. Whereas when we hire, that person doesn't hit the street for 6 months minimum, right?
Yeah, they shorten it up usually. I think they put them through like a 2-month course or a 1-month course, and then they put them right in the uniform in the car and say, see you later, here's your keys.
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
And the pay and benefits can't be matched.
Yeah.
I mean, the difference between a top salary New York City police cop and a Suffolk County cop or Nassau County cop or even state police, like night and day.
Yeah, it's true. And when I started, state police were the lowest paid in the state. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that, because when I came on, they were still the lowest paid, and now they get paid
Education.
more than the city cops do. So
Yeah.
everybody has surpassed New York City, and then they scratch their head, go, gee, why doesn't anybody want this job anymore?
And if you happen to live in one of the suburbs out in the island and you're going to be commuting, it's a tough. And as you drive past Suffolk 2 or Suffolk 3 or Nassau 2 or Nassau 3 on your way to a Bronx or a Brooklyn assignment, people start thinking,
Yeah, my first 5 years, I had to pay the Neck Bridge toll to go to work too. So I was getting paid $25,000, and I had to pay $25 a week just to go to work.
There you go.
Those things hurt. You lived on the island, you got to pay city tax. People don't know these things.
Yeah.
Right? So if you don't live in New York City, you still pay New York City taxes. So they're taking money, or what have you. It's just, after a while, you kind of just say, people just say, all right, I had enough.
Yeah, it's true.
I had enough.
It's true.
And wait till the cops, right, who all wanted to go to Manhattan because some of the precincts are close to the trains and stuff.
Yeah.
Now you add a $23 a day bill on top of that. Guess how many? You'd be like, I'm going to go to Queens.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to be a Queens Marine. Yeah, but it's absolutely disheartening, because like you said, getting rid of college is a big problem.
Yes.
Because they've studies have shown that better educated cops tend to use force a lot less than not college required cops. So they have studies now to show some of the stuff actually worked, but now they're going to remove it.
Yeah.
It's really disheartening, and you see the changes that have happened over the years. But Chief, I just wanted to thank you for coming tonight and spending your time with us, getting a little history lesson. It was actually nice to reminisce a little bit about the good old days and the bad old days, right? You've seen it all. You saw the worst of things, and you saw the best part of things, and your prediction is not very bright, or you're still kind of hoping that they could turn this around.
Well, I'm not a tea leaf reader. I really don't know that. But I'd like to leave, again, your listeners with this thought. I should have mentioned it earlier, Joe. So, the city was turned around. We had high violent crime. We got here, but it wasn't, easy, and it wasn't done from headquarters. It was done out in the street. The men and women of the NYPD, and they paid with their blood and with their lives in many cases. We should never forget that's how we got to where we are today. People like Tony Massimillo or Kevin Gillespie or Sean Harrington or Jerry Harris, good cops doing their job, murdered. And now we have parole boards that are releasing cop killers. So it's a doable job. It's a tough job. And I hate to see things turn back to the bad old days, knowing that so many people sacrificed so much for this city. Thanks again, Joe, for the invite. I hope your audience enjoyed it.
Thank you. And we're going to leave it at that. Everybody, you have a great night. Thanks for all the new members, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.